I think we are live.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. I am Robin DeLucia, and I want to say a big thank you for taking time out of your day to join us today. I am going to try to make it quick so that you can get back to your work or your kiddos or whatever important things you have going on in your life. Before I get started, I want to say a huge thank you to Work 180 for letting me host this webinar on their platform. I'm very excited to be partnering with them. In fact, I was doing research for another workshop I have next week, and I looked back through some of my content and I found that I was promoting Work 180 for women 5 years ago. And this month is my 5-year anniversary for my business. So I'm very excited to be with you today. So we're going to talk about how to nail your job interview. And I'm going to try to be like 30 to 40 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for questions where you can use the chat function. And I also wanted to say a shout out to Jenna and Gemma from Work 180. If you're both online today, again, thank you for allowing me to be your first event that we host on this platform. Jenna, did you want to say anything or?
Yeah, thank you, Robin. Yeah, we're really excited to have you join us for our first event. And I just wanted to thank everyone else for joining and for joining our new community, which we are really excited to share with everyone. The space is completely free, so we encourage you to invite your friends, your family members, your coworkers. And yeah, we invite you to join the spaces that you feel you connect to. So, for example, returning to work, women's health, anything like that. And again, this is a safe space where you can ask questions and share advice. And we also encourage you to look at the resources and share a resource. Yeah, and definitely you can DM me or Robin, of course, afterwards if you have any questions. Yeah, I will let Robin go ahead. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenna. Okay, so I hope you have your roller skates on. I'm going to go through this quickly, and we are recording this in case you need clarification, or like Jenna said, I'm happy for you to send me a LinkedIn invite. I encourage it. It's part of networking, which I teach people to do, and it's not in the comfort zone for a lot of people, so don't be shy about sending LinkedIn invites. Okay, so what we're going to cover today is what you can research before your interview. I'm going to do a really quick, I looked at the sign-up sheet, and there's probably half of us are from Australia and half of us aren't. So I just want to do a really quick overview of Aussie culture, and the Aussies can tell me if I missed anything. And then how to answer the tell me about yourself question, how we talk about our own strengths. I've got some tips for you on that. What are star stories? So I'm going to teach you a framework on how to respond to the behavioral questions. I'm even going to give you some trick questions and kind of what the underlying intent is for those and how best to answer them. And then I'm going to give you in your toolkit some really great questions that wow the interviewers at the end of your interview. So we'll finish up with some of the do's and don'ts, and then we'll open it up for questions, any and all questions. Nothing is a stupid question. And you don't have to put up your camera to ask a question. Just raise your hand and you can type it in and we'll get back to you. With that, we will get started. So for preparation for the interview, there's lots of things that you can do. And trust me, the HR people or the interviewers, they know whether you did a bit of homework or not. And for example, I used to have an HR recruitment manager that worked for me, and she shared with me one of the secret things that she would do to the interview candidates is ask them, what do you think of our website? And you could tell right away who had actually just browsed at least the website or who hadn't looked at it at all. So if you can, have a look at the company's website. Also look at their Facebook, their LinkedIn, their Instagram, their social media pages, just to see how they're interacting with their customers, what employees, how many employees work for the companies. There's lots of good information. It's all free. And if they're in any recent media news, because again, any knowledge, it just shows you that it shows the interviewer that you have more information than your competitors that are interviewing. So it's always a good sign. You can also look at the interview profiles of the individuals if you know their names, and I would not worry if they get a notification that says that you viewed them, because it shows them that you're doing your homework. But you could also see if there's any passions, like maybe you went to the same university, or maybe you both care about rescuing animals. So you can look at other things that might give you just a bit of an edge in your interview, and you might strike a rapport with that person. You can also research the salary range. Look, it's not commonplace for you to be asked about what your salary expectations are in the first interview, but it's always a good idea to have researched that so that you're prepared in case they do ask you. And if you want to download the actual full file of Australia, New Zealand salaries for lots of jobs across both countries and also in the major cities. So for example, if you're an IT engineer or an industrial engineer, you can see what they make in Brisbane, in Sydney, in Melbourne, in Auckland. So that's on my website under the resources. You can download that information. I actually get that file from Hayes, a global recruitment company, every year. So I've just updated it. And then Glassdoor is a website some of you may have heard of. Sometimes people go on that site to complain about their employers. So if you do see a lot of complaints, then that's a red flag to run. You may not want to work for that company, but it also gives you other insights on different salaries if they shared their salary on the site. Yeah, just other information that you can gather about the company. And then it's always in your interest, if you already know someone that works at the company, you can connect with them, say, hey, I'm interviewing. What do you like? What do you like about working there? Or, you don't have to say put in the good word, but at least they can tell the person that they know you. And that's always a great endorsement if you have that rapport with that person. So all of this information, if you can research that and even bring it up in some of the dialogue with your interviewers, they would be very impressed. The next thing is Aussie culture, and Aussies are very relaxed, except they definitely expect you to be early or on time for your interview. So I don't know how many of you live in Sydney, but Sydney is very unpredictable in travel time to get, even if it's on public transport or a car. So always allow extra time. It's always better to be there early. I actually had to tell one client, I said, I know that you get really sweaty and nervous, so get there at least a half an hour early so let your body cool down, so that you can calm down and be ready and go sit down in a cafe and have a coffee. Also, Aussies are very casual, so they're less hierarchical, and they like to have fun with people that they're going to employ. I had a young lady who got a job at Woolworths, and they gave her feedback after the interview. They all talked about her and said, because I guess the team interviewed her in the second round, and they said, would we want to have a beer with her or go out with her? Would she be fun? And they all agreed that they loved her. She's already had 2 promotions in like 18 months of working at Woolworths in the marketing department. So that was great. And then the social interaction, they do like to know that you would at least go have a coffee. Some teams want to go have drinks, not mandatory, but for you to participate in those events, it means a lot. It does not mean that you have to drink alcohol, but they just really appreciate that you would take time out of your day to go hang with them. So that's kind of the Aussie. I had a project when I worked at American Express. I could not get my Aussie guys to cooperate. They were all network engineers. But once I came here and once I went to the pub with them, when I got home, they were always cooperating with all the tasks that I assigned them in my project. So I was very excited. And then body language, make sure, I know handshakes have gone out as the norm, but if the person does put their hand out, make sure it's not a wet fish handshake, make sure it's firm, and you're looking them in the eye. And some cultures struggle with that, so practice looking at them in the eye, especially if there's 3 interviewers and only one is asking all the questions. Still try to maintain eye contact with all 3 when you're giving responses to the questions. And the last thing is Aussies are direct. They will say what's on their mind. So they don't like when we waffle. And what that means is you are asked a question and you ramble on and don't specifically answer the question. So that's why I'm going to teach you the STAR framework so that you can answer very precisely and quickly, and you've got your point across to them. Okay, for the tell me about yourself, I've also confirmed this with HR recruiters. When they ask you this question to respond, and it's usually the very first thing that they ask you, is your chance to give them a little bit of personal information. It's your chance to be vulnerable. And so they do not want you to summarize your entire resume, because you should assume they've already read it if you're there for the interview. But it's a chance to kind of say, you know, I grew up in India. I moved here with my husband and my 2 children. We love bike riding and we love cooking classes. And, you know, I chose accounting as my career because, you know, that was something that I loved in school. I loved maths. And that was a very prestigious career that my parents approved of when I was trying to decide what I would study. So that's a tell me about yourself speech. And what it does is it allows you to strike a rapport. So if one of the other people that's interviewing you has 2 small kids, now they feel like you're in the same turf. They feel more bonded to you. Or if you like, you know, the Aussie cricket team or just anything, all of those things are okay to share. Again, you're keeping the response to this tell me about yourself to 2 minutes. I recommend that people have kind of bullet points and practice it in the mirror with your dog, with your kids, so that it kind of flows. And it doesn't matter what order, but it's just giving you the chance to talk about yourself as a human and what are your interests. And it's the opportunity for you to build a rapport with the interviewers. Okay, now strengths. So I will disclose to you that I am a Gallup accredited strengths coach. And that means that I've done over I've lost count, 700 one-on-one strengths debriefs. Now, what Gallup strengths are, there's 2 names for it. That you might have heard it called the Clifton Strengths Finder, which is named after the psychologist, or you may have heard it as called Gallup Strengths, which is the company that now owns the intellectual property and the research behind it. No matter what, it's almost 30 million people have taken this online survey. It only takes you 40 minutes. You get your results right away, and it will give you your top 5 strengths. It costs like $35 to $40, and it gives you a customized report. So if you're worried about how you're going to talk about yourself in your interview, I really recommend that you take that survey and bring it to the interview. Lots of people have told me the employers loved it. Now, once you get your strengths, sometimes they're in terms that aren't universal. They're not intuitive to somebody that doesn't know about this tool. So you have to kind of explain it in your own words, but also back it up with an example. So when I tell you that I'm a relator, I'm a team player, I like working with people, I like checking in with my people. Positivity, that's self-explanatory. I'm always saying good morning, very cheerful, empathy, listening without judgment. All my friends come to me to download their problems. Developer, I love being a cheerleader for my clients. And woo, which is winning others over. I love talking to the bus driver, the Kohl's cashier. And so I'm just giving you really quick examples of how I use those. If you have analytical, you might love data or spreadsheets. If you have strategic as a talent, you might love mapping instead of using your mapping GPS app. You might love figuring out how to get places on your own. So strategic are very much like to have a plan A, plan B. I really encourage you to look up your strengths and gather those if you can, because it gives you a bit of a language to talk about yourself, and it is a customized report. So if you and I both have relator, it will describe you slightly differently because of how you answered the questions. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is the STAR framework, and this has been around for a long time. There's an alternative version of it, which is called the CAR, I think. But I really like the STAR because it helps us break down our responses to tell the interview a story, and it's in response to a behavioral question, which is very much the norm for most interviews nowadays. They want you to tell them about a very specific story rather than you give them a list of all the skills and attributes you have. The story is much more powerful. And we break this story into 4 parts. So the first part is the situation. So you always tell them what job you had and where you worked. And then the task is kind of the problem, like what was the challenge. The action, it always should include a couple of actions that you did. Some people get stuck on, they will say actions that we did, and that doesn't serve the purpose of this question. They really want to know how you contributed to solving that problem. And then what was the result? One high school student told me, oh, she's like, that's perfect, because I always forget the punchline. So sharing the result, and it can be metrics. We saved the company 10%. It could be, I got a nice thank you note from my boss. I turned a, very crusty customer into my advocate. She only would speak to me every time she called our call center. It could be, I got a promotion. So all of these things are positive results that were attributed to your good actions in this situation. What I recommend is that you have at least 6 star stories prepared. You can bring your piece of paper to the interview. I always used to do this at American Express. They were very big on behavioral leadership questions. And so I would have a problem solving story. I would have a teamwork story. I would have a leadership story. I would have a communication story. I would have a conflict resolution story. And the more different stories you have, the more credible you are. And even better if it's from different employers, because that gives more proof that you have the same good behaviors at multiple places that you worked. And it's okay if the story was from 5 years ago, if that's relevant to the job that you're applying for and interviewing for. So don't worry about job gaps, but just have those star stories ready. And those are also what I encourage people to write in their resume on their first page. Okay, so these are tricky questions that you could be asked in the interview, and people are so caught off guard. So what's your biggest failure? And what they want to know is, can you learn from your mistakes? Do you admit to making a mistake, or do you hide it? And it gives you the chance to answer that question with how you corrected that problem. So I'll give you an example of what I used to use as that response. And it was, I worked at American Express. I'm using the STAR framework, by the way. I was a director of vendor management, but I was brand new, and the senior management knew that this was not my forte, but they desperately had a gap in this role, and they begged me to take on this vendor management role. And so as a result, you participate in RFPs where you're going out to market to bid for technology companies to bid on new services. And I made the mistake of the current incumbent provider, which was a big telco company in the US, AT&T. They were providing the service, so we relied on them to provide the pricing. And then when I sent out the information that was meant to go to all the outside market competitors, I accidentally sent it to them as well. And it's not a big, maybe faux pas for you all, but it was a massive breach of information from this RFP process that's supposed to be fair. And we were supposed to conduct with no bias against the incumbent and any of the other bidders. So my manager found out that I accidentally sent this file to the wrong people. She alerted me. We worked it out, got the IT people to delete it from the email server. But that has always, that happened 20 years ago. And that has always made me hyper vigilant about confirming before I hit the send button who my messages are going to. So that's a response to what's your biggest failure. It doesn't have to be as big as mine, but it can be something that is honest, and it doesn't have to be at work, but it is better to be a work-related response. The next thing is, what's your biggest achievement? I think people ask this to also find out a little bit about your values. You might say, my biggest achievement was having a baby, or it was, relocating to Australia. That was a huge deal for me, to get permission to study and funding and visa. And so, yeah, so there's no wrong answer to that question. It's just, you need to think about it on what you would respond to an employer if they ask you that. And then, what is your weakness? I'm going to give you a tip on how to answer this. Please, please, please don't use I'm a perfectionist. It's so overused and people think you're not being honest and authentic. So the best way to respond to the weakness question is the reverse of your strengths. And I'll give you an example. Another strength that I have in my top 10 is communication, which is why I love giving webinars and helping clients. But I also recognize that I can be too chatty and maybe dominating the conversation. So I pay attention to the body language. And once I notice they haven't said anything for a while, then I turn around and ask them some open-ended questions, get them more engaged in the conversation, ask them about themselves. That's part of my woo as well. But every strength has an opposite. That's a weakness. So positivity, people might think that I'm naive. Empathy, people may think I'm a sap. So just choose you have lots of strengths, but you can choose just one and use that for your authentic response to what is your weakness. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? This isn't meant to be a trick question. They just want to know, are you thinking into the future? You don't have to give them a response that's, I want your job or a specific job title. You can be broad. You can say, I'd like to have worked in two or three departments by that time, and I would love to be, leading a small team. Or you can say, I'd love to learn about other functions, or I'd love to become like the number one performer in the team. So there's lots of ways that you can answer that question, but it's just to see how you're thinking about your future at the company, and are you going to stay? Why did you leave your last job? So it's so important not to make it a negative story, no matter what. The only exception to that is if it's a public company that went out of business, then you can be honest, like the company tanked, they didn't pay me. So you can be honest with that. But otherwise, you don't know what their judgment might be on you if you give them a negative story that you really truly did have a toxic boss. Save that for after you get the job. Why did you leave your last job? It lacked learning opportunities. I really wanted to grow. I'd been there for a long time and I just felt like I really need to change. It's okay to also say the commute was too much. You could say that, I really want to learn about your company and the new technology or the new products that you're releasing. So just try to make it positive. And other trick questions are, what's the last book you read? So just be thoughtful about that. I think you can still use your personal preferences in that question, but it's just being ready for it. And then, what are you passionate about? So you can be honest. I'm passionate about raising money for cancer and doing an annual cycling event to do that. So just be ready for those questions so they don't catch you off guard. Okay, and then this is for you to put in your toolkit of great questions that you can ask the interviewer at the end. So I tell everyone that I work with, please, please always bring at least 3 questions with you to the interview. You can have them written down. You can bring your notes. There's no cheating in interviews. You can, if you're nervous about them questioning you while you brought your notes, you can ask them, is it okay if I refer to my notes? Most people would say, yes, it's fine. But the 3 questions are your last chance to make a really good positive impression on the interviewers. So by you asking questions that are less about me, like when am I going to hear, how many people applied, when will you finish up the first round of interviews, what's the salary, can I work from home? All of those are very me questions. But if you can position yourself to be thinking about the business, like what are your top 3 challenges for this role or for your department? What do you like best? What do you like best about working here? Why is this role available is always a good indicator of, is it new, so that you kind of know going in there's a bit of chaos, or do they have a high turnover? It also, gives you a chance to find out what's happening at the company. I give this question to people that are worried about the culture, and that is, tell me about your best performer and what qualities make them the top performer in your team. And that's always very, very revealing on, do they value a lot of overtime, or do they value innovation or communication with the team? So it's a better way of asking, what's the culture like? Because they'll always give you kind of the standard response. It's very hard to find that out from the website, unless you know people within the company. Then they can tell you what the culture is like. So yeah, so those are great questions that you can ask. I have more. What type of training is involved for this role? Yeah, there's a lot of good questions that you can ask. The biggest one that I really encourage people to ask, and this is so good, is, do you have any hesitation about me performing in this role? And I tell people to ask this question because 9 times out of 10, if you don't get a second interview and all you get is a generic letter saying, sorry, we've gone with another candidate, you never know how you perform. So that's one great benefit of asking this question. The second is, it gives them the message that you're brave, that you want feedback, that you're not making it about you. You're not asking them, do you like me? You're asking, do you have any hesitation about me performing in this role? So it's not personal. And they might be caught off guard if they're a newer leadership role that's doing interviews. But if they're a seasoned interviewer, they should be able to answer that question diplomatically and give you specific feedback. That feedback might be, you have other competitors that have more experience, so you can't compete with that. They might say, well, I was hoping you had more experience in this process or this system. And you can say, oh, I apologize. I didn't do a good job of articulating. I actually do have experience in this and this at 3 different companies, but I forgot to mention that. Or you can be kind of self-deprecating. And so, yeah, this is a chance for you to make a good positive impression by saving it as your very last question. And they should be able to give you some feedback right then and there. And that goes a long way for us, because I think we all, there's only one human that I've met that said, I love job interviews. No one loves job interviews. And so it's important that we get it right. So we show confidence, but we don't appear arrogant, because Aussies have a saying, it's called tall poppy syndrome. They don't like Aussies or people to be too overconfident. And the tall poppy is the tall flower in the field that stands out. So I personally have had to work on being less tall poppy from my American heritage, because I think Americans come across more confident. And so I've tried to be more humble in sharing stories and talking authentically about myself. I hope this helps you. The last slide is do's and don'ts. Okay, so dress up for the part, whether in person or on camera. I had one man that had an interview with Fuji Xerox. They were elated that he had a suit and tie, and I didn't tell him to dress. I told him to wear at least a business coat and a dress-up shirt, because it was kind of a sales role. But they were elated. They told him that they were really pleased that he dressed up for this job interview that was on camera. So yeah, be very conscious. I did a color analysis a few years ago, and it was really great. And you can Google this online to find out if you're a warm or a cool. I found out that I look better with, it matters with your hair color and your eyes, but the warm autumn colors are better for me. So the jewel tones like burgundy, purple, red, navy blue, forest green, all of those colors are great for me. So if you can find out what are the complementary colors for you, that's even better if you wear a shirt or a pretty blouse to your interview. And then, like I said, make sure you prepare your stories, just bullet points, so you're not reading them and you're not too worried. Keep it to 2 minutes for each response. Research the company and the people that you're interviewing with. Show self-awareness by sharing stories, how you've learned from your mistakes. Make sure you have at least 3 great questions. Always send a thank you note that same day or the next day. It doesn't matter if it's email, text. Don't use that thank you note to sell them. All you have to say is, I'm really excited about the job. Thank you for your time. That's it. And then don't misrepresent your experience or diminish your experience, or that you don't have experience in this role. You have transferable skills and you should back yourself. And especially if you had a career gap. I had a man just recently from Spain, and he was depressed. His friends asked him to come to me for help, and he was an industrial engineer, so they make like metal parts. He had 3 years gap on his resume, and he had applied for hundreds. He said 100 jobs in Sydney, not one interview, not one callback, nothing. He had to work in hospitality. When I worked with him, we put some of these great stories on his resume that were from several years ago. He got an interview in 1 week. He's on a student visa, so they're giving him a 3-month trial, and they are considering sponsoring his visa as an industrial engineer. They want him to be kind of a team lead, which is similar to what he did back in Spain as a production manager. So don't worry about the gaps. You still have those great qualities and great experience. And don't forget to bring your notes. You can ask them. The star pose is a YouTube video by a psychologist named Amy Cuddy. And she talks about if you get to the interview and you go in the bathroom and do your star pose for like a minute or 2 minutes, there have been studies that prove that this helps your body, your brain calm down. It helps your chemistry, your blood. If you take deep breaths, slow down, and it helps you perform better in the interview. So go watch that YouTube video. Again, it's Amy Cuddy, and it's all about like when they go through at the Olympics, they go through the finish line. It's that star pose, or you can do it on your hips as well. So I tell that to people that are really, really nervous before interviews. Try not to ramble. Watch their body language. If their eyes are looking at their watch, the clock, the wall, their peers, you've gone on too long. You can even stop and say, I'm sorry, am I not answering the question? And then they can clarify for you, and then you can continue. So it just shows again that you're self-aware. And don't forget to declutter your workspace, because I have had meetings on the webcam where there's like, messy bed in the background, or the lighting, the window is right here and the light keeps changing. So I have a little ring light to help counteract the window light so that there's not a shadow on half of my face. I've made sure that my camera is kind of at eye level so that it looks more like I'm talking to you. And some people have their laptop down and it looks like they're looking down at the person on the other end. So make sure you kind of really measure up your eye level and your space behind. There's also some really cool backgrounds that you can use in place of your home background so that it looks like an office. And I'm happy to share those with you. I'll share the images with you. I get compliments on them all the time. They look real too. So I think those are my tips. The last one is definitely, if you're in doubt, turn off your self-camera view when you're in an interview. You do not want the distraction. You wouldn't have that advantage when you're in an in-person interview. So don't use it when you're on a webcam interview. It's just too distracting and you start to worry about your facial motions and your eye contact. So just be you and go get them. And with that, I would love to open it up for questions.
Thank you, Robin. In the chat, we have 2 questions so far from Erin and Anita. But yeah, just type in the chat and Robin will get to your questions.
Okay. All right. So Erin, great question. When you say bring it to the interview, do you mean just bring the Gallup strengths to the interview? Yes. So when you take the Gallup strengths survey, it gives you a couple of different reports. But there's one that you should bring to the interview, and it's usually like 5 to 7 pages. And it's got a paragraph summary for each of your strengths. Because 30 million people have now taken this survey, I think it's in 27 or 28 languages around the world. A lot of people are familiar with it. So if you bring that survey to your interview and just have a mention of it, sometimes the managers are very interested in it. And it also backs up questions that you might have already answered with, what are your strengths, or, tell me a story. So yes, bring that printout to your interview. Absolutely. And then Anita, so what is it? Anita says, asking questions has to be different for the same company. Second round of interview, I found it is with a different person. So asking questions, oh, I see. I think you're saying, what questions do I bring to the interview to ask them if it's a second interview? And I do have an interview guide on the resources page of my website. And I think I have 10 or 15 really good questions that you could bring. So yes, you could get 2 new questions, but the third could also, again, ask them, do you have any hesitation about me performing in this role? Because I think it's important for us to get feedback, and we just generally don't. In fact, it's disappointing that for so many of our job applications, we never even get a response. Okay, so what else? What are the other questions? Jenna, help me, because there's more than I can see. So let me just look at how to ask. Go ahead, Erin. Jenna.
The one, okay, they're coming in quick.
Coming fast and furious.
Yeah. Hi, Robin. As you mentioned, Glassdoor is a great source of information, but I've noticed that the scores for large companies typically fall within the range of 3.2 to 3.6. Now I lost my place again. I'm wondering if this is considered a good score for a company.
Well, look, Glassdoor has been making changes, so I am not an expert in that space. I would take it with a grain of salt. And I know, because it's been around for 10 years at least, that people originally used it for more kind of a sour grapes. So I would really just use it as just another information source. But for the people that are motivated to, I think Glassdoor has tried to change that so that it's more information, more positive information on the company as well. But I wouldn't be able to comment on what's a good score for the company. Apologies.
Okay. Whose video should we watch for the star pose?
It's Amy Cuddy. So I'll write her name, Amy Cuddy. And
Okay.
it's a YouTube TED Talk. And she has a few, but yeah, you can just Google star pose, and she talks about that in her.
We will put that in our follow-up email.
Yeah. Another YouTube video that I love to recommend to people that are really low confidence for their interviews are watching Brene Brown on YouTube. It's one of the most viewed TED Talks on the power of vulnerability. Some of you may have heard of it, but it's amazing because it talks about, we wouldn't marry our new partners or have children or choose to go to school in a certain city without being vulnerable. And so that's like the circle of life. So I really encourage people that need a pick-me-up to watch that video. It's about 20 minutes.
Yeah, I agree. Any specific advice for career change interviews?
Any specific advice for a career change? So I do have probably about 30% of my clients are career changers. So you have to spend some time doing some self-reflection. And so I kind of do a mix with people. So I have them do kind of this 3-question survey to people that they respect their opinions. Like, when have you seen me at my best? What am I good at? And then I also have them, do a very quick survey on, okay, when I'm watching TV, what do I gravitate to watch? When I'm reading or when I'm talking with friends, what are the themes? And sometimes there is a common theme. I like cooking, or, I love the thrillers, or I love the human, humanity overcoming adversity. So there's themes in those things that you gravitate to that relate to your career choice. And then the strengths profile I do with people as well, but I insist that they get the full 34 strengths report, which is like $80. But then we focus on their top 10 strengths and we look at careers that allow them to use those top 10 strengths, because Gallup, their research has proven that if you're doing a career that allows you to use your strengths every day, you're 6 times happier at work and you're 3 times happier in your personal life. These are good questions, guys. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, they're very good questions. Another one, how to answer questions like, have you ever gotten a feedback or review, especially if you haven't?
Have you ever gotten negative feedback in a review? Is that what they're asking? Or
I'm not sure. Maybe we can clarify that. That's from Dodson Jolie Matthew. We can get back to that one. In the meantime, okay, either, they say.
either. Okay, so look, I think if you've got a good company and a good employer, they are going to give you constructive feedback. So I would answer that question in that same tone. Yes, I have been given constructive feedback that I need to interact more with my team, or I need to take more time in doing my tasks, and I've gotten a lot better. Like, you always want to share how you've corrected that feedback or how you responded to that feedback, and the more positively and the more results oriented that you responded to that feedback, the better. The next year, I got great praise from my boss because I really closed that gap. So that's a really good message to your employer. And I saw someone that said, should I disclose that I have epilepsy? And I don't know if Gemma wants to comment on this, but this is kind of the purpose of Work 180, is making sure that diverse employers are not discriminating against you because you have a disability. And so I personally would want to disclose that. And if they don't react well, then it's not an employer that I would be excited to work at, because there's family members that have epilepsy, and it's quite scary and jarring if you don't know what to do when this person has an episode. So yes, you should disclose it. I would talk to the recruiter if you have that opportunity. If not, then I would save it till the end of the interview and just ask, do you have any concerns or programs that support people with disabilities? So you're highlighting that it is a disability and that they should be inclusive of you for job opportunities.
Yeah, and we had another comment from Joe who has MS, and she was also asking, but I guess it would be the same, right?
Yes, and Gemma just posted an article that says where you can see what their policies are and if they're an endorsed employer and if they've had the training for hiring with disability. So I'm seeing that a lot more in like my clients' job applications. It asks them, do you have a disability? And I love that they're asking that, because I think they're giving it more care in the application process. And I think that's important for us to do for people with disabilities.
Right.
And I hope whether you have epilepsy or MS, you don't feel offended by me saying it's a disability. I apologize if you don't prefer it to be called that way.
Right. Okay, so Hillary asks, I keep being merit listed for roles, government roles, which means I'm good enough for the job, but not the first preferred candidate. I suck at interviews, I waffle, I lose my place in my response, and it all gets very muddled. I make notes beforehand. Sorry. I make notes beforehand. Oh, I keep losing my place.
The questions keep coming in.
Yeah, any advice to keep it really tight? She does use the STAR model. Yeah, she
does use a STAR model.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I would have those STAR stories ready to go. And, I've got some YouTube videos that talk about that, answering those questions. I do practice interviews with people, but you can hop on my website and reach out to me or send me an email. My email's on my website on the front page. So I've found that this year I've had more people that are nervous and not doing well with interviews. And so they've scheduled a one-on-one with me. And I think they find it really helpful because we can talk through their responses and where they get jumbled and what's a more precise subject to talk about, and we might even switch the examples that they use in their responses. So yeah, it's hard to say, but yeah, that's tough. Like some people just do not love interviews, and I feel like there's so many great performers that we miss out on because of that. But just keep persevering. You are going to find something.
Mhm. What would be good answers for are you interviewing for other roles? And like the progression of your interviews for other roles.
Yeah, so I always encourage my clients to disclose that, even if they're not asked, because in the HR industry, and you all probably know, in Australia, the job market is really competitive, which is why you never get feedback, you never get responses to your applications. So if you're interviewing, they are serious about you coming and joining their company. So it is nothing worse, and you're burning a bridge by not disclosing to them that you are interviewing with someone else. Now, the reason that's a good message to tell them is that it makes you more of a hot commodity. You're more marketable. And so they're going to probably try to expedite their process to get a decision. So that's not a bad thing. And you might be more confident in asking for the salary that's fair. So yes, you should disclose if you're interviewing with other companies, especially if you're working with recruiters, because there's nothing more embarrassing than a recruiter putting a candidate forward and then they ditch it at the last minute, or they tell you they've had another job and you're kind of blindsided by that. So yes, it's good for you, and it's good for the employer and recruiters to share that information.
Okay. Erin says, I'm a mom. I'm a mom going back to work after a few years out. I can only work part-time, but I'm finding that most jobs I like are advertised as full-time. How might I approach asking an employer if they would accept a part-time employee?
That's a tough one. So if they haven't, I would be honest in the interview process and know that it might cause them to not continue in the interview process. But the other thing is, if you can try to get the job full time and then prove that you can go part time, there is a legislation that the Australian government passed years ago called flexible working. I have the government document on my website, and it navigates the conversation with. It helps you navigate the conversation with your employer about asking for, like, some people need carers leave, some people need flexible work for small children under 5, and that's how. So the government jobs are really good about flexible work. The private employers are. It really depends on their own policy. So it depends on how, strongly. If it's actually absolutely critical, I would only be looking at companies on, Work 180's website that advertises flex careers. On Seek, if you just do, if you look at the location now, they've got a new location that's remote, work at home, part-time, whatever. I would look on those. I would be only searching for jobs that are advertised as flexible working and part-time. But I see a lot, so I'm surprised that. I don't know what your industry is, but I see a lot of 4-day-a-week jobs now. So employers are saving money, and I see a lot more advertised these days. Oh,
Okay.
here's a point from Sharon. She's saying, I work in injury management and HR, and so it does help to share any medical conditions that may require reasonable adjustments to support you at work. Great. Thank you for sharing that, Sharon.
Okay, we had a question from Vanessa. So she has tried the Amy Cuddy power pose, but she still feels anxiety and nervousness, and she's missed out on jobs because she rambles and forgets what she was going to say. Especially when they ask her the question when I should be the best person for the job. Sorry, I think I messed that up. But yes,
Okay.
feeling anxiousness and nervousness.
Yeah. So the response to the why should I hire you, or why are you the best person for the job, it should be your why. And so it's not just because you have the skills and you have the experience. It's more about, well, I've always wanted to work for Qantas. That's been a dream of mine. Or, this is like the next wonderful step in my career where, I want to learn more about this system or process. Like, it's telling them that you have desire to learn, or a passion that's something related to this company or this product or service. It's all about your passion for the company, because if you've got two candidates and one ticks all the boxes and the other one has a lot more passion, the passionate person is more often going to be hired because they think they're going to stay there longer. And it's a lot of money to train and recruit new people.
Okay. How do we use the STAR approach in a resume in relation to talking about transferable skills and how to showcase one's skills to address suitability for a role, especially after a career change? I went from marketing and comms to project management in tech.
So the same, it's using less words, but it's, when I worked, so this is a bullet point that I actually write on my client's first page. So it's like a capability section. It's kind of the secret sauce that's getting my clients callbacks on their resumes. So I have resume templates on my website and blog articles about the good bones of a resume and the great contents of a cover letter. So I have all that stuff. But the short answer is, when working at New South Wales government as an IT service coordinator. This is what I'm doing with somebody yesterday. I was asked by a client to help restore a file that was related to a child case. And it had been deleted. She wasn't getting results. Sorry, I'm adding more words than I should, but in the bullet point, I would say, I was contacted by a specific customer because I worked in the IT help desk. I liaised with another team to get the file restored, and the customer was so happy because it was restored in time for her meeting with the child custody case people. So it's like two sentences maybe in those bullet points, but you're hitting all of the STAR framework. What was your role? What was the problem? What was the actions you took? And then what was the result? Oh, so Gemma is saying one technique that works for me when I feel anxious before public speaking. And by the way, I was anxious before this. My heart rate was at 110. Close your eyes and imagine you're in a situation in front of a crowd speaking. And then when you're actually in the situation, it feels less threatening and you're mentally used to it. Nice. Thanks, Gemma. Visualization.
Is it okay to ask the in-house recruiter for the reasons why other candidates did not proceed in the interview process?
Why other candidates didn't proceed in the interview process? No, it should only come from those candidates, and they can't disclose anything to you anyway because of the privacy laws. They're really strict in Australia, I feel. But you can ask for feedback for yourself if you didn't proceed in the interview. And sometimes they will give you that feedback. You just have to, when you receive that feedback, the best advice I ever got was never be defensive. Say thank you for your feedback and then go away and think about it. It may be good, it may be bad, but accept it and thank them for their input.
As a woman, are there any tips you would give into approaching mining companies during the interview process?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you, it's a little bit of a conflict of interest to approach them during the interview process. So if you're trying to get the interview, I would be using LinkedIn or messaging if you have contacts, like text messages. People obviously respond to, like, hey, my colleague referred me to you. I would love to get your career advice. So you're not asking them for a job. During the interview process, I would stay back and wait for them to navigate that process because they might feel that you're interfering with it if you're trying too hard to get into the job. So they have to conduct a fair process. A lot of companies will take notes. They have a file in case they ever get accused of being unfair in that recruitment process.
How would you answer the question, why did I decide, or I guess, why did you decide to leave marketing and go to teaching for 10 years and now you're returning to marketing?
Yeah, so there's very different dynamics for marketing and teaching, right? So marketing is highly competitive, extremely fast-paced. Teaching, the landscape of teaching has changed because of COVID. So to me, you've got a legitimate reason to say, you liked teaching at first, but COVID changed all of that. And I actually have used this with teachers who wanted to get out of that that industry and go back to marketing and just say, you know, you like the creativity, you miss that. Whereas teaching is a very rigid, you know, you have a lesson plan that you have to create, and it's very prescripted, I guess, depending on what age group you were teaching. So I think you can explain that well enough in your resume, your cover letter, and your interview process that people will understand. Like I had a lady who was doing social work. She was a social worker and she was triggered by some of the violent people, the violent threats she was getting. And so because she had been in a domestic violence situation, she wanted to get out of the social work, even though that was her degree. And so we wrote in her resume and her cover letter that she really wanted to change, that it wasn't healthy for her and her two small children. And now she's doing great at a not-for-profit as an admin. She's had salary increases and she's thriving. She's doing really well.
If you are unsuccessful after the interview, should you always email the company to ask for feedback?
I think you can always email them and ask. So always thank them for the interview, because sometimes they call you back because you were the second in line. So always send a thank you. You know, really appreciate the learning opportunity, and you would love to be informed of any future opportunities. And if they had any feedback that they could share with you, you would be very grateful. That's how I would word it. But just know that a lot of people won't take the time to respond with feedback. But I have heard of people getting a call back because they were the second candidate and the other person didn't work out. So keep those bridges positive and open with those companies.
Okay, so Eva says, English is not my native language. Is it okay to write at the end of a cover letter that I could not find someone to proofread before submitting my application? And Gemma did suggest Grammarly, which we all use at Work 180, actually. It's a great tool.
Yes, Grammarly is there's a free version of Grammarly that you can download. And I have a couple of other clients that same struggle as you. One lady's from Peru, and I really have encouraged her not to send me emails until she's used Grammarly to check it, so that she gets in the habit of the proper English grammar and punctuation and nouns and pronouns, because yes, they do kind of look for any reason to throw out your application. So if there's, you know, visually anything that's confusing or does not flow in the sentence format, they'll move on to the next application.
Okay, could you share any suggestions for the situation when we encounter unexpected brain freeze, unexpected questions or get sudden brain freeze?
Yeah, so honestly, if I had told you at the beginning of this webinar, I would say, I'm sorry, I'm nervous. Just a moment while I gather my thoughts. Would you all judge me or think negatively of me if I said that? I would like to think you would not. And so it's okay. And people recognize that most humans are nervous doing an interview. So it's okay to actually call out that, I'm sorry, I'm nervous, or can I start again? As long as you don't overuse it in the interview session. So saying it once, let me get my thoughts. That's a good reason why you bring your notes, so that you can go back to the stories that you wanted to share, or the questions that you wanted to ask. So it's hard, but look, if you say, I'm really sorry, I'm nervous, people will kind of soften their approach and not ask, as difficult questions, or they might phrase things a little bit more understandable, I guess. So it is okay to make that statement that you are nervous, and most humans will understand that and take that into consideration.
Okay, so we've got one more question, which brings us to an hour. But of course, we'll be sending an email, and then you can always reply to that email. So
Absolutely.
Our last question is from Elizabeth, who asked about the mining. So she just wants to know any more tips for women going into a male-dominated industry, such as mining, and how to prepare for the interview, knowing that you're new to the industry.
Mining is tough because it's very blokey and very, I have to say that there's a lot of misogyny, but I have known female leaders that worked in the mining industry, and it's kind of the fake it till you make it. not getting emotional, not letting them know that they're rattling you or that you've got this. It's also about asking questions. It's finding your tribe within the team so that you've got some trusted people that you can go to ask for advice and how to handle certain situations. As far as networking, if you're trying to break into the mining industry, I would be using LinkedIn. I would be approaching strangers on LinkedIn, and I would say something like, I would send them an invite and I would say something very personal like, I read your profile and I really loved that you went from OH&S, coordinator to OH&S manager in a matter of 6 months. Like something that tells them that you really dug into their profile and that you appreciate, and I'd love to hear about that. I'd love to have a virtual coffee with you, or I'd love to buy you a coffee if you're up for it so that I can ask you for advice. So it's always asking for advice, and people are happy to talk about themselves and share their advice. I had two of my old neighbors. One was a lawyer, a senior solicitor, and one was a data scientist. And I had two clients that were interested in those fields. So they both of these different neighbors met with my clients just to give them advice and let them ask questions. What do you like about the job? What do you not like about the job? What do you suggest that I go study in preparation to work in this industry? I don't know. Does that help, Liz?
Yeah, and Gemma just shared a really great blog
Cool story about a woman who went from childcare to mining.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, we're going to sneak in one more question before we go. Should the strengths be in line with the job profile?
It's a good question. So yes, your strengths, this is my opinion, so this is not feasible for everyone, but it's always important. And in my career, I have seen that when you know what your strengths are and you choose a career where you get to use those strengths, you are happier. And so if, let's say, one of your strengths is harmony and you don't enjoy conflict, but the husband and wife owner of the company are constantly battling, it's not about you. They're not arguing with you, but it's something that just it makes you dread going to work every day. That is the time you need to go to a new business, because as a person with harmony, it just doesn't align with your values. You would like to be in a workplace where everybody is supportive and encouraging. I know most of us would like that anyway, but for somebody with harmony, it's really, really hard to work in that type of environment. So yes, your strengths should align. And I actually went through for people that can't afford to do the strength survey, I actually made a page on my website of a 1-minute summary of each of the 34 strengths, and also what's the weakness for each of the 34 strengths. So have a look around there if you can maybe identify what your own strengths are.
Okay, amazing. So yeah, as I said, all the resources that we spoke about will be sent out in an email to everyone. And yeah, if you enjoyed this, our next event is going to be in 2 weeks. It's going to be on burnout. So definitely share that with your community as much as possible. It's also going to be free. And yeah, Robin, anything you wanted to add before we jump off?
No, I would just invite everyone to send me a LinkedIn request or connection request or an email. And if any of these tips gave you the leg up and you got the job offer, I love your good news stories. We would love to hear any good news stories that people got the job because of some of these strategies and techniques. So go get them. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.